to a Hope 1032 podcast.
So a key aim of the Rites of Passage was for the boys to be humbled and the girls to be empowered. Now, when we don't do that, the danger is that the boys, because they're not humbled, they become arrogant and entitled. And the girls, because they're not empowered, play small, and that impacts on what jobs they go for, what clothes they wear, all of these things, because they haven't been empowered.
Hello friends, I'm Colette Smart, psychologist, teacher and author, and it's so good to have you here on the Raising Teens podcast. I have such hope for this generation of teens, and so if you're navigating the ups and downs of life with teens and tweens, you've come to the right place. My guests and I are here to share practical, science-backed tips to support you and your family today. Don't forget to subscribe and then join me on my Instagram and Facebook, and let's help this generation thrive together. After 15 years working in emergency medicine, Dr. Arne Rubinstein shifted his focus to designing and delivering programs that help organizations, families, and individuals thrive. Dr. Arne is globally recognized as an expert on rites of passage and the founder of the Rites of Passage Institute. He has completed executive leadership programs at both Harvard and Oxford universities, and in 2024 was awarded the Order of Australia for his contribution to youth development. With more than 30 years of experience, his transformational work has impacted over 450,000 people across 25 countries. In 2025, Dr. Arne was named Father of the Year by the Fathering Project, recognizing his long-standing commitment to strengthening father-child relationships and empowering families through positive, healthy parenting. Well, welcome, Arne, to the Raising Teens podcast. I was saying to you just a little bit earlier that I have followed your work for a very long time. So I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Rites of Passage and Rite journeys are something that I have had some dealings with. My children have gone through some, and I work at schools that run Rites of Passage type programs. Your name is really very well known in Australia, particularly on Rites of Passage. So I'd love you to just start telling our listeners a little bit about this whole concept, if they don't know what a rite of passage is in kind of the modern sense, I suppose, because we often think of it as something the ancients used to do. And how, in your opinion, is this different from a youth development or a well-being program that's being run out there?
Thank you, Colette, and lovely to be on the podcast with you. So a rite of passage is something that is created to support someone in a major transition time in their lives. And the one that we have been most interested in is when a child becomes a young adult, sometime around puberty or after, between, say, 12 and 17. And that transition can be done well, or it can actually be a disaster.
Yep.
Our whole work and our program is about how can we create a healthy rite of passage. And, for example, we have in Australia schoolies, where after 12 years of school and being looked after, hordes of children go to either Byron Bay or the Gold Coast or Bali or Fiji, and they do actually whatever they want. And they have access to alcohol and drugs and no parent supervision and people wanting to have sex with them and risk-taking behaviour and all sorts of things. And that is often called a rite of passage. And, it is a rite of passage because for many of these young people, it is the transition from their childhood to their adult years, but not in a good way.
Yeah.
And I believe that I know that we can be creating healthy rites of passage that really launch our young ones as they enter into adulthood. And actually, I am convinced from having done this work for over 30 years and before that being an emergency medicine doctor and seeing the impact of unhealthy rites of passage, I am convinced that every one of our children is going to go through a rite of passage. And the question is, will that be a healthy rite of passage that's created by their community and is genuinely supportive of them? Or will it be a potentially disastrous rite of passage, which will have possibly long or lifelong impact on them in a negative way?
You're so right, because young people absolutely will create a rite of passage for themselves if they don't feel like one is created for them. If there isn't a rite of passage that we intentionally put into our young people's lives, they will try to find a way that says to them, this is what being a man looks like, or becoming a woman looks like, not being a girl. And where do they turn? Social media, their friends' influence, and they look at what does a man mean. And you're so right with things like schoolies. Well, to them, if it isn't shown in a healthy way, it means getting blind drunk and having sex with as many people as possible. And that's what they think makes them an adult. So I really think it's so important that we invest in our young people's futures, as you say.
Yeah, well, when I worked during schoolies, actually, given that it's such a big thing in Australia, and for 15 years I was an emergency medicine doctor in Byron Bay during schoolies, and what I realised is that the young ones who were coming into the emergency department, they were trying to do the things of adults, and those things, as I said, would involve alcohol or drugs or sex, but with no supervision, no understanding of the implications, and no boundaries.
Yes,
I mean, of course it wasn't going to go well. And it was actually a very sad time. You know, I saw many boys who'd been in fights or injured themselves seriously, way too many girls who'd, done something they'd never done before in their life while they were drunk with someone they'd never met before, and were going to regret that forever. It was just not, clearly not a healthy place or how we wanted to be introducing our children into adulthood.
No, absolutely. When you spent some time up on schoolies, did young people themselves talk to you? Did you kind of see regrets from them or parents? Or what was that experience like for you, actually speaking with young people who you were worried about?
Well, it was a very profound and often sad experience, because I did see the worst of it being in the emergency medicine department. But what was very interesting to me was that I would talk to them all, but I'd talk to the girls and I'd say, did you know before whatever it was that you did was not a good idea or it was not going to work out well? Was there some sort of voice inside you? And the girls would look at me, and most commonly they would nod their head and say yes. They had known it was not a good idea, but they hadn't trusted that inner voice inside their heads. And I found that very interesting. And I really came to believe that, one thing, if we could teach girls to listen to their inner voice, that would really be impactful and important for those girls. And the other thing I saw with the girls is they weren't watching out for each other.
Oh.
And so they were basically on their own. And so one of the things I encourage the students to do who are going to schoolies is have some discussions with each other and your friends about how you're going to support each other. If you see one of your friends has, had too much or under the influence, that you step in. If you see them going into a situation that's not good for them, that you support them, all of these sorts of things. But then I would speak to the boys, and I would say to the boys, did you know that whatever you did was not going to work out well? Before you jumped off that balcony or got in that fight, did you have a voice inside saying this is not a good idea? And the boys would look at me and they'd go, nah. They hadn't even thought about it. They just saw glory. And
that's fascinating.
I found that really interesting too. And so, when we are creating rites of passage for our young people, we need to, take into account that one of the key aims for example, and, I am being binary here, and I do strongly believe that every child, whether they are binary, non-binary, of any gender or non-gender, that we have to be creating rites of passage for all our young people. And we need to be teaching them both to listen to their inner voice, to support each other, and if they need that sort of glory, as in overcoming and achieving something or doing a challenge that they didn't think they could do, that also has to be part of it. And you mentioned earlier about ancient communities and tribes having done rites of passage. And I've actually studied communities all over the world, and they certainly did. Every single community, every traditional and Indigenous community recognised that when our children reached a certain age, which is around about puberty, the community had to do something to create a ceremonial transition from child to adult. Because if they didn't do that, then the danger is that those young people would remain in the mindset of a child and end up running the community, and that would be a disaster. I mean, imagine if our international leaders and heads of big companies were still thinking like children and, you know, mainly interested in their own well-being and all of these things.
Kind of want to add there, maybe some of them are, and perhaps they needed to go through your rites of passage program.
Well, maybe. I mean, as a healthy adult, we realise we're part of our community and our actions affect others, that if we have power, it doesn't mean more for me. It means I can actually do more good in the community.
Yeah.
You know, I have to be able to hold my emotions. I'm allowed to be upset or angry, but I'm not allowed to attack someone. And, you know, it's just a completely different way of being.
Of being a healthy adult.
Yeah, it's what it means to be an adult. And so when I studied the communities all over the world, the thing that astonished me was not only did they all create rites of passage, but they all did it in the same way. And they all used the same stages. All the young people would be taken away for a period of time, go through a transformation, go through a rite of passage, and then integrate back into the community as a young adult. And so we worked out from that we can create modern rites of passage that are appropriate for young people today and still contain the same stages and elements of a rite of passage, but that are appropriate for the time and place we live in and not trying to replicate something that happened somewhere in the jungle or the outback.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point about the rites of passage being something for our time. But I find something interesting you said, because you mentioned that a lot of the ancient cultures and communities had rites of passage, but their steps or stages were quite similar. Is that what the research shows?
Yes, that's what they worked out. They worked out that at the age at its time, that they have to go away for a period of time. So you can't do a rite of passage in the home, in the community. Whoever's going through the rite of passage has to go away for a period of time. And then while they're away, there are certain things that they all did. And the first thing was they got to hear the stories of the community and of the elders.
All right.
And the communities had worked out that the way to pass on wisdom and knowledge, the best way, is in fact by sharing stories. And we look at teenagers today, they don't want to be told how to live their lives. They don't want to be told how they're supposed to be, but they're definitely interested in hearing our stories and hearing what it was like for us when we were growing up and hearing our own experiences in relationships and hearing our own failures. They especially want to know about when we got things wrong. Yes. So stories are still an incredibly important part of rites of passage. There was always some sort of challenge in a rite of passage. And interestingly, for the girls, the challenge often involved a period of time alone and learning to hear and trust their inner voice and their cycles.
Goodness.
And for the boys, the challenge often involved facing the possibility of death or having to deal with severe pain. And, interestingly, back then, the boys were going to become probably warriors or hunters. And for the girls, they would have a different role in the community. And often it was about becoming a mother and looking after the community. And so learning to trust that inner wisdom. And often there was a lot of endurance in the girls' rite of passage. Now, when we look at rites of passage today, there's a lot more crossover. And so the challenges that we create are different. And we believe all children need to learn to trust their inner voice. All children need to have resilience and endurance. And all children need to be able to face into challenges and, the difficulties in life. But another thing that I have found fascinating, and I've been studying more and more lately is that in the boys, a really important part of the traditional rites of passage is that the boys were humbled.
Oh,
And
okay.
that humbling was seen as a critical thing, and the girls were empowered. So a key aim of the rites of passage was for the boys to be humbled and the girls to be empowered. Now, when we don't do that, the danger is that the boys, because they're not humbled, they become arrogant and entitled.
Oh.
And the girls, because they're not empowered, play small, and that impacts on what jobs they go for, what clothes they wear, all of these things because they haven't been empowered. So a big thing for us in the rites of passage that we're looking at creating is acknowledging that when a boy becomes a man and has power, that's only good if that power is used in a humble way as opposed to just for himself.
I want to ask you, because coming a bit of a link to that in my mind is parents might be wondering where you've spoken about boys needing to be humbled or facing, in previous generations, facing the risk of death or whatever. So parents might say, well, then what is the problem with some of these hazings that we've seen in the media at private boys' schools, for example, where, boys go through the group and they're humiliated? What is the difference? Can you articulate that?
Sure. There's a big difference between humbling and shaming.
Great.
And traumatizing.
All right.
Humbling is realizing I'm not the center of the universe. Humbling is realizing it's not just about me. It's about my family, my community, the world we live in. I have a responsibility.
All right.
And when someone is shamed and traumatized, they will have a reaction to that. And I actually believe that most of the highly pathologically unhealthy leaders that we've had in the last forever have been shamed and traumatized rather than humbled, and that they're a lot of the incredibly unhealthy behaviors that we see are as a result of that.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if part of these shaming rituals, hazing rituals that we see is another way of young people trying to create a rite of passage for themselves that goes completely wrong because nobody's guided them in what a healthy way one looks like.
That's exactly what it is. That is exactly what it is. Instead of having elders in the community who are actually doing it for the benefit of the young ones, when they're doing it as a way of sort of staying on top of them, that is what we find. And, I've spoken to many people who've been through incredibly unhealthy university hazings and events, and they talk about how they came through and it was terrible and how shameful it was. And then the next year, they did the same thing to the next lot of novices.
Because it's all they know.
It's all they know, and there's no supervision and no elders present creating the process.
Yeah. Arne, can you give us then a brief breakdown of what your program would look like, just so that parents know what you're talking about in terms of, we've spoken about the ancient programs and how modern day or current day programs need to look different for the teenagers we're raising. What does that look like for you?
Well, we do a lot of work with schools, and we do a lot of work supporting schools to sort of change their school camps, especially around year 9, from activity-based camps where they go bike riding and abseiling and high ropes courses to actually a transformational rite of passage type program. So one example is that we work with the school, and on that school camp, they still do the activities, but every evening they'll do one of the elements of a rite of passage. So on the first evening, the students will get to share their stories about how they grew up, and also the teachers share their stories about what it was like for them when they were that age. And we use stories as a way of passing on wisdom and knowledge and also building community. On the second day, we may well include the next stage of a rite of passage, which is a challenge. So there are challenging events on school camps, but often that's all it is. It's a challenge, but it's not debriefed and it's not worked with. So what we'll do is they'll do their challenge, which might be a high ropes course or a long hike or something like that, but then they'll sit around and they'll talk about it and they'll share how they went, what they did well, what they didn't do well. And then the gold is if we can say to them, does this behavior show up anywhere else in your life? And if they can recognize that, oh, yeah, I give up too easily, or what it might be negative, it might be positive, or I'm actually a great leader and I support others well, or I need to, communicate better. And then from that, we can say, well, what would you like to change as a result of this challenge? What could you change when you go home? So there's the challenge element. The third element that's always in a rite of passage is creating a vision for the future and who they want to become and what they want to leave behind. So we do a vision process on the camp. And the fourth element of a rite of passage, which I really love, is this idea that every child is different and every child is born with their own unique gifts and talents, genius and spirit. And so one of the key elements of a rite of passage is to help bring out the spirit, the gifts, the genius that is in each child. We use what we call an honouring process, where one at a time, each of the students sits or stands in front of their class, their teachers or whoever's present, and for a period of time, everybody there who wants to has an opportunity to tell that young person what gifts they see that they have and where they see it. So that one might say, you're incredibly kind and generous because the first day I came to the school, you were the one who looked after me. You were the one who shared your lunch because I hadn't realised I had to bring my own. And, you have this beautiful gift of caring and kindness. And, and when kids get honoured by other students, by teachers, and even better if we can have the parents involved, that is a life-changing process for them. So when we create rites of passage, whether it's at a school or whether it's in one of the community camps we run at our programs at our campsite up here in Byron Bay, we always include sharing of stories, appropriate challenges, vision, and a recognition and honouring of each of the young people who've come along. And when we do that, that transforms and changes something in them significantly. Yeah. And I know it because I've been doing it for over 30 years around the world. We've had nearly 500,000 people through our programs, and I see the impact that it has on them, and that impact is lifelong. And that's what we want to be bringing back.
And I think it's, that those things like honouring in the last part or last one of your challenges, kids step up when they are asked to do something like that. You may initially have the odd kid who, is a bit silly or whatever, but very quickly they step up because they see the importance of honouring their peers and being kind, and they actually learn by observing the teachers and other peers doing that well if they've never done that before.
And we have a very diverse group of kids who come, from all sorts of different demographics, and some of them are in trouble at school and some of them have had other problems, and probably a third to half of them have got some neurodivergent diagnosis and all of that. And by the end of the program, these kids are extraordinary. They're fabulous. And I get asked all the time, or someone says, oh, this is a special group of kids. They're just amazing. And I say, no, they're not a special group. They're not amazing. This is a normal group of kids, but we bring out the amazing in them. We bring out their genius. We bring out their gifts. We bring out their spirit. And when you bring out someone's spirit, that's when they shine. Yeah. And that's what rites of passage are about, bringing out their gifts and their spirit.
Incredible.
But I do need to say something here, that rites of passage are not just for children for becoming young adults. We all go through major transition times throughout our whole lives. When we leave home, it's a major transition. Sure. When we get into a relationship, if we get married, if we have children, when we get a promotion at work, when we become an elder, when we eventually die, all of those things are rites of passage. And in traditional communities, all of those events were marked by rites of passage. Oh. And one of the things that we've come to realize is that when the children go through a rite of passage and become young adults, we also need to support their parents to go through their own rite of passage, which involves letting go of their children, allowing them more privileges, but, that also comes with responsibilities. And I talk about that there's a staircase in life, and each step is a different stage of life. And when our children move up that step from child to young adult, parents also need to move up a step and let their children go through that developmental stage. Because if the parents are not involved and don't know about it, the danger is that when their children come back from their rite of passage, the parents will push them back into that childish place, and then it doesn't go well. You know, rites of passage are in fact for everyone in the community, and they're not only for developmental stages like the ones I mentioned, but they're also for those what we call sort of spiral or difficult moments, you know, disappointment, betrayal, loss of a loved one, you know, all these things that we will go through at times in our lives. And in the same way as our developmental rites of passage can be managed well, the difficult times in our lives can also be managed well or terribly. And having worked as a doctor, the one I saw managed terribly the most often was death. How badly we manage death, how in denial we are.
We do not do death or process death well at all.
No, we put it in a corner. We pull a curtain around it. We pretend it's not going to happen. And then once it does happen, you know, often we don't ever talk about it again and we don't process it. And it creates lifelong problems. Yeah. So I've come to realize that rites of passage are not only about supporting people when they move from one stage to the other, it's about supporting them in the most difficult times in their lives.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing.
Yeah, really important. I'm actually fascinated that you spoke about when children are moving out from home into young adulthood and parents having to face that, because on this season I've actually got someone who's going to be talking about empty nesting. So, and I hadn't thought of that as almost a rite of passage moment for the parents, even themselves, and the young adult kids.
Yeah,
so,
well, definitely
rite
it
of
is.
passage is so intertwined in our lives.
Yeah, a lot of parents really struggle, or some parents really struggle when their children move out and their sense of purpose is lost. And part of rites of passage and the vision of a rite of passage is around that purpose. So if when the children move out, it's celebrated, it's acknowledged, there's sharing of stories, they look at the challenge for the young ones, they're going to have to look after themselves, for the parents, they're going to have to let go, you know, vision for how they want their relationship to be moving, to be when they move forwards. And it won't be the same as it was, but it can still be healthy. And then also recognition of the gifts and the genius and the spirit that each takes into the next stage. That's how it's done beautifully. When it's done badly, you know, the parent tells their kid to, you know, go jump, storms out the door and doesn't speak to them for 5 years. Yeah. So, you know, and it happens.
Yeah. And some parents do tend to hold on really tightly to their kids out of fear, or, you know, there could be cultural differences, particularly, I mean, all my listeners know I grew up in South Africa. I've been here more than 20 years, but there can be very different if you have grown up in a specific culture and your children really want to identify as Australian, and that can create some of the difficulties in these transitions. Have you seen much of that happen?
Sure. I mean, it's a difficult time.
Yeah.
And it's rarely managed sort of with awareness and consciousness. So, I mean, the classic sort of outcome of it is that parents and their children stop talking to each other.
Yeah. And that's devastating. That's the last thing you actually want. You want to still really allow your children to develop their own autonomy. And I love how you talk about their spirit and allowing them to, or for us as parents, to recognize what that is and what that looks like in the country or the community that they're living in, and still build your relationship with your child throughout their adult years.
Yeah, and build is the word. Build is the word, because how terrible is it when you see parents of 30, 40-year-olds still treating their children like they are children, and the children acting like children when they get back with their parents.
Yeah.
As opposed to being able to have, you know, healthy conversations, understand that they're both adults. You know, it's a whole different thing. And when a you know, a person who still acts like a child with their parents then gets in relationship and the partner goes, oh my God, you know, you become like a child And if you've got a problem, instead of coming to me, your partner, you're ringing your mum or whatever, it's not okay. Or they try and replace their parent with their partner.
Yes.
And all of these things just don't work well.
Yeah. In your experience, I know you wrote the book, The Making of Men. So is there much of a difference between boys and girls' experiences as they come out of rites of passage programs with you?
Well, there's a yes and a no in that because, as I say, traditionally a boy's rite of passage and a girl's rite of passage was very different. But we live in a world today where there's a lot less difference between the future outcomes for boys and girls. And so, we look at them as all children who are becoming young adults. And, we want, if traditionally, whatever was in a boy's rite of passage can be included in a girl's rite of passage and vice versa, all of these kids need to go through rites of passage. And one of the things that I haven't spoken about, but which is really important, is that in a traditional community, they might have sent 20 kids out for a rite of passage and only 15 came back. And they would say, oh, well, that's how it goes. Those others weren't supposed to come back. It wasn't their, their journey, blah, blah. And, in our work, if we take out 20 kids, we have to bring 20 back every time.
Yes.
But the thing is, we're losing kids. We're losing kids in car accidents. We're losing kids to drugs, alcohol. We're losing kids to suicide.
A different way.
So, I actually believe we have a moral responsibility to be creating healthy rites of passage that are culturally appropriate for all of our children.
Absolutely.
And it will be different in different cultures. I work in some Indigenous cultures and they've approached me because I would never go to an Indigenous culture and say, I'm going to do a rite of passage for you. But many of our communities here haven't had rites of passage for, 200 years. And we'll say to them, if they want our help, we can teach you the framework, but you have to bring in the culture.
Beautiful.
And do.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that online on your social media and so on. That looks amazing. Now, have you had parents approach the schools? I know I have parents who are really quite terrified of their children doing a rites of passage program. Particularly what I find interesting is parents who are really afraid of sometimes when children are given the opportunity to spend a night alone, like literally alone in a tent or whatever. Obviously there's adults around in the vicinity, but there's no phones, no anything. And the kids are alone overnight for themselves as part or on their own as part of the program. Have you had parents struggle with that?
Absolutely. And by the way, a solo, which is what you're talking about, I think is a fabulous challenge part of a rite of passage. Because one of the things is we have to create something for them that's actually challenging.
Yeah.
It's not a game. And it has to be difficult. And it has to put them outside of their comfort zone.
And create risk, but healthy risk.
It has to have the feeling of risk.
Yes.
But we have to keep it safe because we're not allowed to lose kids.
Yes. And so it's healthy risk.
Correct. So a solo is perfect because we can know where they are and we can observe from a distance and keep them safe. But for many of the kids, they've never done something like that. And when they finish, their sense of pride in having achieved something that they haven't achieved before is fabulous. And the insights that they get, there are some schools now in Australia where they actually do a 3-day solo and they have a tent and they have some food and they have 3 days. And, the thing is when we have parents who are helicopter or snowplow parents and remove all risk or all feeling of risk from their child's lives, I believe we don't do the kids any favour.
Yeah.
The greatest issue we have in terms of mental health of our children is anxiety and lack of resilience.
Yeah.
And if they feel at all uncomfortable or unsafe, it has to immediately be removed. Now, I believe that part of life, life's learnings is about being able to deal with uncertainty, being able to deal with situations in a healthy way that don't feel safe. And this is the training time. So this is the time to actually create scenarios in a safe environment, but that actually don't necessarily feel safe. And the skill is to recognize, to what level we do that. But if we don't ever provide that for our children, then when they leave home and get out into the real world, which has everything that's in the real world and is definitely not always safe or structured or predictable, I think those children really struggle to cope when something goes wrong.
Yeah. And if we have, I'm thinking now, parents who want to integrate elements of rites of passage or principles of the rites of passage into their child's daily life, and their child's school doesn't run something like this, what would they do? What do you advise parents to do?
Well, it's a great question. It's probably less about their daily life, and it's more about recognizing that there are significant moments that can be celebrated and, where a rite of passage can be created. And that can include their first day at school, their last day at primary school, when they reach puberty, when they finish school, if they have a sporting achievement, all of those things. And a lot of our work at the Rites of Passage Institute is around training and educating people on what a rite of passage is, why it's an incredibly healthy process for young people, and how we can be creating them. So we have resources like my book, which is The Making of Men, and The Making of Men is about boys, but I think about 98% is very relevant for girls. We also have an online Rites of Passage leadership training, which people can do self-paced, or we have masterclasses where myself or one of our senior facilitators spends time through the course with the group and answering questions and talking about different elements of rites of passage, because our vision at the Rites of Passage Institute is to make rites of passage mainstream once again, healthy rites of passage.
Yeah. And parents or religious communities or, sporting communities, they could sign up to that and look at ways that they could run that with some of the children in their care. Is
Absolutely.
That okay.
Yeah, definitely. And it's about, creating rites of passage for the children so that they go through a healthy rite of passage rather than it being an unhealthy one.
Yeah. One of the things I actually loved, I saw on your website, was the talking stick. Tell me a little bit about the talking stick, because you even sell some talking sticks.
We do. We sell talking sticks. So one of the big elements of a rite of passage is, as I mentioned before, sharing of stories and sharing, in fact, of feelings.
Yeah.
And just being able to share your own story, your own feelings. And we've found that in order to set up those sharing circles in a healthy way, we need some rules. And the first rule is that only one person speaks at a time.
Yeah.
So if someone's speaking, we just listen to their story, their feelings. We don't interrupt. We don't make jokes. The other thing is it's a confidential conversation. People are not allowed to go and talk about what someone else has said. And the third thing is that if someone doesn't want to talk, they don't need to talk. It's fine. They can pass. And when we have those rules, sharing circles are wonderful and fabulous and can go very deep. And the research shows that they're actually also highly therapeutic. And we've found the best way to bring those rules in is to use a talking object. We use a stick, but it doesn't have to be a stick. It can be a crystal. It could be an orange. It could be a pencil, a flower. It doesn't matter. And then it gets passed around. And everybody knows that whoever's talking, we just listen. It'll be confidential. We won't talk about it. And if someone doesn't want to talk, they can pass it on. So we've got some sticks that we collect here at our beautiful property, Yarrakura, in Byron Bay. And we've sanded them down and made them nice to hold. And we send them out in a box with instructions and some tips on how to do a check-in and different things. And they've been really popular. And it's a beautiful way of supporting people to have healthy conversations with their family, in their community, and their business, in their sporting team, wherever they happen to be involved.
So the reason why I find it fascinating is because one of my children and my husband, when one of my children was growing up, they're a very strong personality. And so they would, I won't say which child it is, but they and my husband would often talk over each other.
Yeah.
And they ended up getting a talking stick and using it to talk. And it worked brilliantly. And then it kind of wasn't needed anymore because the skill was kind of learned. But what was interesting is my husband and I, we've been married for 31 years now. And we did a marriage course last year. We just tend to do it sort of intermittently because it gets us talking. And one of the suggestions was a talking stick. And my husband found the talking stick from he and my child. So, and sometimes we talk over each other and we went, oh, maybe we need the talking stick. And I love that you said you don't actually have to have a stick, because we were out for our weekly chai the other day and they've got a long spoon. And I found myself talking over my husband. I'm the one who tends to talk. And so I said to him, give me that spoon. And so we kind of passed the spoon. So whoever was holding the spoon was the one talking. So that's amazing that you actually sell them and send them out. And it's such a good tool for learning to listen and, just having a tool for communication.
Yeah. I mean, I was very fortunate to get the award for the Australian Father of the Year this year.
I know. Yes,
and
congratulations.
one of the things thank you. And one of the things I'm doing in schools is doing parent-child events. And one of the things we do is on some of the schools is we get all of the children to make a stick, to get a stick and to draw on it and to write the names of people in their family and do some drawings. And then we teach them about doing a check-in. And we do something called a rose, thorn and banana peel check-in. So whoever's holding the stick, the rose is what happened today or this week that was good. Thorn, anything that was tricky or difficult. Banana peel, anything funny, quirky, interesting, weird that happened. And it gets passed around the family and everybody speaks. And ideally they do it at the beginning of dinner or wherever they are. So everybody gets to hold the stick, do their rose, thorn, banana peel check-in. Then the conversation happens. And it's a very, very different conversation to kids arriving at the table. How was your day? And that's
I love that you brought that up, because I actually talk about that in my book. That's there's research around just this beauty that comes out of dinner table conversations. It doesn't have to be dinner, but that they just did some research in dinner table and the impact that it has on children's development, because they get to hear a parent have something to say that wasn't so great or what they enjoyed about their day. And so I always, with my children, often did what was one good thing, what was one not so good thing. And my friend, who's also a psychologist, always added what is something interesting. And I love your analogy, the rose, the thorn, and the banana peel, because that's exactly what that is. And adding the talking stick or whatever it might be to your dinner table conversation is kind of the symbolic reminder of who's actually talking, whose turn it is. And also kids can pass if they don't want to talk at that point, but they have to still listen to their siblings. And kids learn that their parents also have a bad day and how they coped with that.
Correct. So we can send you a link to our rose, thorn, banana peel process,
please.
And then you can send it out to listeners and they can use it.
I'm just going to say now to the listeners, I'm going to put it in the show notes so you can check immediately at the end of this episode. You'll find the link to that in the show notes.
Great. And then, the research is fascinating that they found that families who had dinner together 3 or more times a week, the children did better developmentally. I was astonished that they did that research because I thought every family had dinner together regularly. Yeah. But the research shows that it's a low percentage do, and a huge number of families, the kids are in their room on their computers or watching TV. In fact, there are even families now who don't have a dinner table because everybody just has their dinner on their own somewhere in the house or in front of the TV or in front of a computer. And that to me is extraordinary.
Now, if you say, I just want to go back to something talking about having elders. If you're a parent and you feel like, what does that look like for my modern day contemporary child? How do I make sure there are elders around my child in this process?
Great. Well, elders is a big topic for me because I am over 60 now and I feel like I'm in the beginning of the elder journey. So I've really been investigating it and trying to work out, how can I be the best elder I can? But when we talk about having elders, grandparents,
Yes.
fabulous. And one of the best things is for children to spend time with their grandparents without the parents around.
Yes.
And they actually say that children and grandparents have a special bond because they have a common enemy. And the thing that happens when you get children and grandparents or elders together is the elders pass on their wisdom to the children, and they can see the children. They see their gifts. They see their genius, and they name it. And that's what the children need. They need to be seen, and they also need to get wisdom and knowledge, and they get that from hearing the stories and the teaching of the grandparents. So that's what the elders give the children. And in return, the children give the grandparents or elders what they need, which is energy and a sense of purpose.
That's beautiful.
And, I saw it with my father when my children were little, and my father would be rolling around on the ground with them, and he'd go to his office and pull out a microscope that he'd put back together for them, and the children would be enraptured and love it, and they just all loved each other so much. And, it's a beautiful relationship.
You said grandparents will often really see the child, see their spark, their spirits. And my dad has been brilliant with that. A lot of the grandkids are heading more towards young adulthood, but there's still 2 in high school. But my dad would spend his weekends on a Saturday and or a Sunday, at least at 2 of the grandkids' sport or event, just cycling through the grandkids. And he was always there cheering quietly from the side, sometimes on the side of the cricket pitch, which, bless him, he was there even more than me many days because of the heat. And he just saw my kids. You're absolutely right. And sometimes my kids would come back from my parents on an absolute sugar high that used to do my head in, but they were allowed to jump on the beds and, all those things we were never allowed to do
you weren't
ourselves.
allowed to.
Yeah, but they can do with the grandparents. And I have loved watching my parents and my in-laws just do different things with the kids that they can't do with me. And you're right, in those times with my mum baking, actually just this, just before Christmas, my mum always has the 2 youngest grandkids who are in high school still making gingerbread houses. And they talk and, chat in the kitchen. And you're right, so much happens there that's not just about the baking gingerbread. So
yeah. So grandparents are a great elder source, but also, for the parents, our own friends. I was great friends with some of my parents' friends, and my children have been great friends with some of my friends. And, often the children will feel more comfortable speaking to an uncle or an auntie or a pseudo uncle and auntie than they will to their own parent for whatever reason.
Yeah, so if parents are listening and their children don't have grandparents either living in the country or still alive, there are other people in your life or your child's life. You need to proactively seek out those people for your children.
Yeah, and you could even say to them, hey, I have a lot of respect for you and I see how you are with my child. I would be, super appreciative if you would spend some time with them or mentor them. And it's something, unfortunately, that we've lost.
Yes.
And, one of the things that often happened in the Indigenous communities we mentioned earlier is that every child would get a mentor, someone from outside of the family who would be responsible for supporting that child through their young adult years. Unfortunately, today, any adult who spends time with children, we look at them suspiciously.
Yeah.
And that's a tragedy.
You're right.
The terrible things that some adults have done to children have meant a whole generation of other children miss out on that invaluable mentoring.
Yeah. If then a school or a parent is listening and they want to know about a Rites of Passage program, how do they find or judge that something is of high quality? So obviously going to your website, but also I suppose you're aware that there will be fly-by-nights out there saying, well, we run Rites of Passage programs and we're cheaper. How do parents and schools decide what is a good quality one?
Look, I think you have to meet the people who are creating the rite of passage. You have to look at their history. You have to look at their reviews. You have to look at the program that they're promoting. We want rites of passage to become mainstream again. And so a lot of our work is training facilitators and supporting schools to be able to have in-house rites of passage. And at the Rites of Passage Institute, we've set up programs in over 70 places around Australia and more than 25 countries around the world. And it's 500,000 people now been through. So, we're very happy for people to contact us. And if we aren't running programs in the area, we're also happy to recommend who we think that they could approach.
Okay.
Because we really believe that every child should have the opportunity to go through a healthy community-run rite of passage.
To end then, I want to ask you the question I ask all my guests. What is your hope for this generation of teenagers?
Well, my hope for this generation of teenagers is that they can really find themselves, that they can really get in touch with what is that inner, I call it spirit, genius, talent, or talents that they have that they can then offer to the world. And whether it's their musical or whether it's their, they've got a passion for animals and could be an incredible vet or a doctor or an architect or a builder, whatever it is, but that they can actually find what is inside them, what are their gifts, and bring that to the world. And I think it's extremely relevant because with the impact of social media and technology, I feel the shadow side of that is trying to make all the teenagers think that they have to be a certain way, which is often not in their best interest, and creates an enormous amount of pressure for them to do certain things. And so for me, it's about my hope for teenagers today is that as teenagers and as adults, they can really learn that the best person that they can truly be is themselves.
Thank you so much for your time on the podcast and just sharing what you do with parents. And I know there'll be a lot of parents in schools jumping onto your website to have a look at next steps for them or their schools or their children. So thanks for everything.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I really appreciated Dr. Arne's reminder that we go through different rites of passage at various milestone life stages. Not just the teen years, which we spoke about a lot in this episode, but a new job, marriage, a divorce, death in the family, empty nesting. If you would like to find out more about his work and his book, you can go to the Rites of Passage Institute.org. And if you would like a chance to win a copy of his book, The Making of Men, jump on to the win page on hope1032.com.au. You can also find me at raisingteens.au. And if you have a question about raising your teen, please contact me via email or my social media pages at Colette Smart, or you can go to the Hope 1032 podcast page. Please share this episode with your friends and subscribe and review wherever you get your podcasts. This helps others to find us. See you next time, and in the meantime, keep parenting with your teen's future adult in mind.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.